Good morning, Knicks fans, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. My name is Andrew Claudio, aka GMAC, and it is time to preview the second of a back-to-back, even though they were separated by one day, against the Washington Wizards down in DC. Weird schedule that the Knicks are just going to DC for a couple of days, but we'll take it, especially if the games are as thrilling as the overtime matchup that we saw on Saturday night, in which Jaylen Brunson scored 55 points in like I said, a thriller against a team that may only have 5 wins, but gave the Knicks their best effort and will be getting one of their best players back. Kyle Kuzma looks like he's going to suit up for the first time in about a dozen games against the Knicks in this matchup on Monday night. The 5-24 Wizards, we've gotten jokes off at their expense, but they were nothing to joke about on Saturday, that's for sure. Let's talk to an expert about the Wizards to see if that's the effort we should expect tonight, or if that was a one-off. And joining me to talk about this matchup against the Wizards from the Bleav In Wizards podcast, returning guest, Mr. Matt Modderno. Matt, how are you, sir? Happy holidays.
I'm great. I love getting jokes off at the Wizards' expense too, so this will be perfect.
Good. You're in the right place then to do this. And I'll just start with Saturday night's game. I was my again. This is now the third time I'm shouting this out. And when you have a podcast, you should be shouting out your mom's birthday as often as you can. I was at a birthday dinner for my mother on Saturday night. Happy birthday, Mom! And I was watching the game on my phone, thinking, no disrespect, but just real, like, oh, it's the Wizards. Like, I will not have to sweat this out. And then I ended up at a game night for with some cousins, and I just like had to tap out for a little bit. It's like, someone replaced me. This is way too close a game down the stretch. And part of it was 3-point variance. Part of it was just guys in the Wizards stepping up, hitting shots. Very impressed with Bub Carrington, Champagny, the New York zone. Apparently, we're just claiming people from Staten Island as New York zone. Why not? That was just an impressive performance from the Wizards, just to give the Knicks a game. Obviously, the Knicks on the second night of a back-to-back. How many of those games have you seen this season where it's a competitive effort that ends in a loss? Let's start there.
I think this is a sentiment that Knicks fans will still kind of resonate with, despite you guys having a good team to watch this year.
Okay.
This is just like the wrong time to play the Wizards. I think like they've been a little feistier the last week or two, and a couple of those games have been against Charlotte. So maybe that's more on Charlotte than it is on Washington. But they got absolutely drubbed a couple weeks ago, and actually a couple times a couple weeks ago. But it just sort of one of those gut check situations for this team. And I think they've gotten to a point where it's like, okay, we have to be just like somewhat competitive, at least a portion of the time, and put up some resistance. And they've just been able to like be a little scrappier, hang in games a little longer. I think as Wizards fans, like, we know what the assignment is this year. The team knows what the assignment is this year. So, but you can't just kind of go out and be down 25 at the end of every first quarter and have the game be immediately over. And so I think if you wanted like the easy win, 2 weeks ago, I think you would have been able to get that. Honestly, I kind of think that's probably how this game plays out. There has been sort of one, not to put the blame all on one person, but there has been one common denominator in some of these blowouts, and it's been one of their higher priced veteran guys that it just looks like that experiment has sort of run its course, and Kyle Kuzma may not be long for this world. You got his mom out there tweeting about, his next destinations and stuff like that. So
really, oh no,
there's just probably kind of the end of the road for him. And I guess they have to get him back out there to show people he's healthy enough to trade. But I don't know how you felt watching this, but like the ball movement was really good for the Wizards in this Knicks game. It led to a lot of those open threes. So I didn't feel like it was strictly like they hit a bunch of fluky threes and got hot. It was, hey, we actually are making a concerted effort to generate good shots for each other. And they actually made a few for a change. This has been a bad 3-point shooting team, but the ball didn't stick with one or two people, and do with that information what you will. So that may change tonight. And honestly, the chances of us kind of giving the Knicks a run 2 times in a row, I think, is a little less likely.
So I should clarify, by the way, the Champagne twins are, I guess, from Brooklyn, not from Staten Island.
No,
That might not seem like an important clarification, but when I tell you, Matt, that is a very important clarification.
Okay, all right, I like it.
Make sure I get that on the record, so
Okay,
that way
got it.
nobody
Don't
from
want to offend
Brooklyn,
anybody. Yeah,
nobody from Brooklyn thinks I just said that someone is from Staten Island, and that's
yeah,
just
same
like, oh, I
thing.
could just ignore that. No,
Yeah.
no. Very different planets, both those boroughs.
Baltimore and DC are the same thing too. Like we love that.
Here too. I know that I lived in Virginia for a little bit, in Central Virginia, and do not say, oh, it's the same thing, the DMV. Like, no, it's not. Baltimore is an hour north and very different than Washington. Exactly. I've learned that I was taught that in probably the most toughest of ways by getting it wrong. So I definitely am with you there. So Kyle Kuzma coming back tonight, it shouldn't invoke the fear that I thought it would, for it, just as a Knicks fan, as someone, as an outside observer, understanding what I think Kyle Kuzma is. You seem to think that, oh, we will not see the effort that we saw the other night, because the hierarchy will be different and they'll be more dependent on someone that isn't worth being as dependent on. Is that what I'm reading here?
It's just one of those things where, like, for whatever reason, it seems like that dynamic has kind of soured. The ball sticks with him a decent amount. There's been a lot of like clear out ISO Kyle Kuzma moments, and I think when you're the underdog team, the best thing you have going for you is like, hey, 5 guys here. We don't really know who to scout because we don't know who's going to step up with Kuzma and Poole out. Like, sure, it's going to be Koulibaly, but who else does anything, beyond him? Champagne's been good, but I still doubt he's kind of like risen to the top of scouting reports for other teams yet. But for Kuzma coming back, it just seems like Koulibaly gets a little too differential, and when he's not moving and doing the same thing and attacking the basket, it kind of stops generating looks for other people. I've been like the biggest Kyle Kuzma supporter. I think it's just one of those things where you're starting to see reports leak out now that, well, he wasn't willing to go to Dallas last year, but maybe he's a little more willing to end up in Dallas this year. And it's like, you got to assume that those are coming from him and his agent pretty strategically. And I think the plays reflected that, honestly, from training camp on. He just came in, he looked a little sluggish and slow. And I thought the biggest thing Kuzma did was sort of like, he was a big playmaker that you didn't need to run a lot of plays for. And he got downhill and he kind of collapsed the defense and kicked out to people. And this year we have not seen that same player. It's just been a lot of like, my turn, Jordan Poole, your turn, my turn, Kyle Kuzma. And now Poole's not out, so maybe it's a little different. There's been a few moments of him looking good running with the young guys. So I don't know. I could be totally wrong, but my gut is this doesn't end particularly well. But he will score 20 points. So if you're playing him in fantasy, I think that's a smart move.
So Kuzma's contract, he's making 23.5 this year, and it's a descending contract. So he's at 21 the year after, 19 the year after. So this is a good contract that you probably could get something good for.
Sure.
What would you be? I mean, you mentioned Dallas. I'm sure there's a market for Kyle Kuzma, especially if the DFS, the Dorian Finney-Smith trade threw me for a loop, because I thought that would get like a protected first and maybe 3 Lakers seconds in 27, 29, and 30, I think it was, or 3 late Lakers seconds. Well, who knows what those values may end up being, but I almost wonder what the value is for Kyle Kuzma on the market. And my question is, like, what's an acceptable return for Kyle Kuzma if you see this relationship ending?
I think if you ask the fans, the perspective is the majority, I think, would say just do whatever you can get at this point.
We're in ham sandwich time. Like, I will trade him for a ham sandwich.
Maybe not quite that bad. I think most people are like holding out for like, you give me a really late first and we'll move on. I think the reporting last year was that the Wizards were like adamant that they had to get 2 first-round picks out of this, and it didn't materialize. That Mavs purported trade got them like kind of close. It was like maybe a good young player and like a pretty good first-round pick and maybe some seconds. But the market just doesn't seem there. And honestly, the way he's looked this year, he hasn't been healthy a ton. And just the efficiency has kind of cratered. So you've got a guy that's only played 12 games this season, shooting 42% from the field. He's averaging 2.5 turnovers a game. Like, who's bringing him in to like, he's shooting below 28% from 3 this year? Like, not the best shooter in the world, but he's all kind of subpar. Even from his standards, free throw shooting is down. Like just everywhere across the board that's meaningful is kind of down. The playmaking is down big last year, 4.2 assists. This year, less than 2. So if you're a team and you've got to fit this guy into your sort of existing framework, like you're not bringing him in here to be a gunner that gets up, 12 shots a game or whatever the case, maybe 15 shots a game. Like he's got to find a way to get in and fit in. And that's a little harder to envision just based on the way he's seemingly wanting to play. Like when you get a guy that's had, I'm the alpha, even on the worst team in the league, is he going to want to go back to being third, fourth option like he was in LA? And the answer is probably no. So you've got to find like the perfect situation. And I don't really know where that is and who's desperate enough to give you real assets to get him.
Man, Kuzma, if you're getting traded to a contender, you're going to be the third, fourth option on it. I'm sorry. Yeah. That's just the reality of the situation. No disrespect. If you're going to Dallas, you're not the second option. That's for sure. You're probably the third in certain games, like if Clay has it going and if like a weird night where Washington or Quentin Grimes has it going, you're a depth piece in those situations. So, we'll see what happens there. I'm sorry to make this so transactional at the top, but I guess the other questions I would have would be like the Brogden of it all, the Valanciunas, Jordan Poole. Like I gotta ask, like who the keepers that you want to see on still on this team on the other side of the deadline, and who do you think will just be gone on the other side of the deadline?
I would make everyone over 23 years old available if I were that front office. Okay. And I think it sounds like that's kind of where they're at. Well, the Poole one is interesting, right? Like last year, he was probably untradeable in the wrong way. This year, they might view him in a positive enough light. The Poole experiment has been a little better. Poole as point guard experiment has been a little better than it was, at the tail end of last season. And he was definitely trending up last season at the end. So I think you've seen some progression. He's still young enough. They can maybe convince themselves that he could be a piece. So I don't think you need to deal him just from we have to get him out of here perspective. You probably need at least one sort of high usage veteran to take some of the load off these guys. And they've still performed, the young players have still performed reasonably well next to just Poole out there. So I think there's no urgency, but if you can get something for him of positive value, I would do it personally. There's not a ton left on his contract overall this year, although he makes, after this year, I think he has 2 years left and makes $30 million, but that's a little easier to stomach, with only 2 years left of it. The Kuzma deal is a good one. So if you can convince someone to take him, you take whatever you can get. I don't really expect them to get much back for Valanciunas or Brogden. Like Valanciunas as a free agent had almost no interest. So our team's suddenly going to be so much more desperate now that they'll give the Wizards something of real value back for this kind of rental, piece here for them. Like who are they really going to build Valanciunas into their long-term plans, beyond a year or two? So that's a question. Brogdon would be a full rental. His deal's up at the end of this year. So that's the question. He can't really stay healthy. He's even missed some games here in Washington. He's been good now that he's been playing, from a box score perspective. So if somebody gives you 2 second-round picks for him, I think you pull the trigger at this point. Holding out for anything more than that, that's really been like the Achilles heel of this new front office so far. He held on to Tyus Jones for too long. They played Landry Shamet well into the depth of the season last year, hoping that they could kind of garner some kind of interest for him. And I don't know, you guys have seen a little Landry Shamet this year. Like that's not a guy that you're expecting real trade value back for. I wouldn't think.
Eighth man. Yeah.
Yeah. Or lower, honestly. So it's just they've got a lot of those kind of guys. We think someone should value them. So are we going to hold on and not be desperate to trade them? It's like, if you can get anything for them, you should do it before you let them walk. So
we'll see. Then ideally, I'm going to ask you to speak on behalf of all Wizards fans everywhere.
Gotcha. Yeah.
What's the starting five for the majority of the post-deadline stretch for the Wizards?
I think this group you saw against the Knicks that looked relatively competitive for a large stretch of that game was some variation of Bub Carrington, Keyshawn George, Bilal Coulibaly, Justin Champagnie, and Alex Sarr. Like, I think you would want 4 of those 5 guys on the court as much as humanly possible. Like, Champagnie's still young enough. You could actually consider him an interesting piece, and maybe somebody you want to have like in the mix longer term. So that's been like a nice revelation for the Wizards pool. I think by all accounts, 95% chance he's there and out there with that group. So him and guards and wings and a forward around him. And then I don't, Marvin Bagley's hurt. We'll see when he comes back. If you do trade Valanciunas, that leaves Rashawn Holmes as the lone center left. I'd rather see them go small than need to play Rashawn Holmes at this point in my Wizards fandom. So yeah, I think just the four young guys essentially as much as you can.
I guess the other part about that version of the team, that roster that you're talking about, I like Coulibaly. I like Carrington. The main piece, and maybe that's really what you're hoping to get back in the draft, is who's going to be the guy that all these pieces now fit around. It's like I see Coulibaly as like a great Robin or a 1A or 1B, whatever. And they're just missing Batman, So that's where, I mean, have you already started scouting the draft at all? Is it Cooper Flag or bust? Are these Rutgers kids intriguing to you?
I sat first row at Cameron earlier this season just to get a look at Cooper.
I want people to know this was an alley. This was I lobbed this up because I saw you post this. Yeah. Go ahead, talk about it.
It was incredible. First of all, I'm a Maryland fan growing up, so I have to still hate Duke, even though we're not in the ACC anymore. But that place is worth getting to if you ever get the chance. But they've got 3 guys that could realistically be lottery picks. So even if you screw up this tank somehow as the Wizards and you end up at 6, 7, 8, there might be some other interesting pieces there between Flag, Common Malawach, and Konka Nipple. So there's dudes. I think if you're the Wizards, like, you have to kind of go star hunting in this draft or next draft. Realistically, they're gonna be bad again next year. So I don't think you have to like totally panic of, I can't see this guy being an all NBA player, so we can't take him. But realistically, in a good draft, if you're drafting 1, 2, or 3, you should probably be hoping the guy turns into an all NBA player at some point. So that's why this team is so bad. There's no situation where they get sort of, like surprisingly feisty and actually start winning some games down the stretch. This front office is worked too hard to not let that happen and build a roster that's almost like competition proof. So I think you maybe be, like I said, a little feistier with the young guys, but you're still not going to win enough games to hurt your draft spot. And the worst record doesn't guarantee you the first pick, but it guarantees you stay in the top 5, and you have to be in the top 5 in this draft. So I'll take whoever they can get in this top 5 and feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, New Orleans got invited to that party as far as worst record, and unexpectedly, you're just like, oh wow, this team that almost won 50 games last year is now gonna challenge the Wizards for fewest wins in the season. Look, I think you nailed it, that it's up to the front office to make this roster as competition proof as possible. Here in New York, and I was reminded of this in our YouTube comments, I should really explain why there was so much consternation yesterday amongst New York Giant fans, New York football Giant fans, in that the Giants were slotted as the number 1 pick. They were 2-13, and then inexplicably beat the Colts 45-32 or 33 yesterday out of the Meadowlands. And arguably the most frustrated, outside of when the Jets were 0-13 and then beat the Rams, when they were obviously they were winless, and that win that they got sent them from the 1 pick to the 2 pick. Or players don't tank, organizations do. So if your organization is so desperate, I personally lean toward like Colts, go out there and beat the 2-13 Giants. Rams at home, please go out there and beat that. Like, I'm mad at them, not the players that I used to root for. But regardless, I think that's where the push and pull of what you want to see the rest of the season will be fascinating. Because look, that was a fun game. That would have been a fun win for those young players on Saturday night if the Wizards had won that game against the competitive or borderline contending Knicks team. And then, it ends up in a loss. So that
That's the dream for Wizards.
It really
fans
is the
this year,
joke, the
right?
dream,
Like,
honestly, that all these games are competitive, but then Jaylen Brunson happens and it still counts towards the tanking standings, right?
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Just looking
So
at that Knicks team though, real quick, like
yeah. Go
that's
ahead.
sort of the blueprint, I think, for Washington, right? Like, hopefully Bilal is like an OG plus kind of player, like,
Okay.
maybe Bub is a Josh Hart, like, and you're starting to get those sort of like really good, like, I don't mean this in any way like degrading Knicks fans, like, don't take this the wrong way, like, but like super role players, right? Like the guys that are not really like stars above
Yeah,
themselves, but like, kind of elite at that role. And I don't think like Alex Sarr to me doesn't project as like a star player, but could he be like the third or fourth best player on a really good team? I think that's kind of like more so where I see a lot of these guys, and you need a Jaylen Brunson at some point. And where you get him, can you be competitive enough building through the draft? If you add a Cooper Flag, who in my opinion is probably not a 1A on a really good team,
hmm.
but like a super solid piece, can you go out and then get a free agent to come in and be that kind of guy, or get lucky on a younger guy that magically wants to come and play in your city for half the money he can make elsewhere, or any of those kind of things. But that's really what you got to hope for, I think, at some point.
Yeah, yeah. Look, that was I was talking to the new Knicks beat writer for The Athletic, James Edwards, maybe a week or so ago, and the Knicks had just gone through a stretch where these young athletic teams like the Hornets and the Jazz and the Pistons were giving them trouble. And we like shout out to one of our commenters, Russ Guberman, has made that same point in the past. And I kind of agree with him. Like they have struggled at points this year with these young teams that kind of come out with this energy that
Mhm.
they punch them in the mouth in the first quarter, and then they're left trying to match that energy the rest of the game. So we'll see what happens in this matchup. You hinted that Kuzma being back might deter that. So I'm kind of hoping, I'm banking on that at this point, that the version that we saw on Saturday night doesn't exist. So I do want to get your thoughts on the Knicks. Like, do you have any, like, your overarching thoughts on this team, whether it's a contender or not, the trades that they made? Do you have any questions about that for a Knicks fan and a content guy? Like, what your thoughts on the Knicks, Matt?
Yeah, it's interesting. I like this team a lot. Like, it's the kind of basketball I like to watch. I don't know if everybody out there feels the same way. I think that the Towns integration, there's still like a few moments where that looked a little clunky. I'm
Okay.
not watching a ton of Knicks games, but it just seems like between he, OG, and Bridges, like sometimes they seem to be like kind of gravitating toward the same spot on the floor. And having like one other sort of change of pace big, I think would go a long way for this team. Just somebody
Interesting. Okay.
like just a zag away from Towns. Like, he's a more perimeter oriented big. Like, he'll post up some, but obviously not like the major strength of his game. But just somebody that gives you a slightly different look. To me, like, you've seen enough of Towns, in big game situations where someone else to just sort of like alleviate a little pressure there, I think would be good for him. But it can't just be like a bunch of solid guys and Brunson going for 50 every playoff game. So who's the secondary piece? Can Cat go for 30 every night? Like, it's just when you have sort of a more balanced team approach like that, like, everybody's got to be pretty good, I think, every night for you to make this like deep run. And to me, they're like at worst like a second round team. I think it's that get over the next hump piece. You need a probably consistent who's the third guy in the pecking order, and then, like I said, just a little like, depending on what matchup they get and things like that, like who's the other guy? Are you going to rely on OG as a small ball five against Cleveland or something, in a second round playoff matchup if Towns is in foul trouble or rolls an ankle or whatever the case may be? So just like a little like insurance for some of that, I think would be helpful, but I don't know.
So this is where a lot of people have questions about Mitch Robinson and
Sure.
whether bringing him back allows them to create the look that was very successful in Minnesota
Mhm.
with Towns at the 4 and then a traditional rim running center, which would help your rebounding, help your defense. I'm kind of addicted to 5-out offense at this point,
Yeah,
and
I'm
I
with
got to
you.
be honest, like they're second in offense in the league, and I think look, I don't disagree on the defensive end, and like I was talking to my buddy Sam Vicini over at the Game Theory podcast last night. The issue with Towns getting in foul trouble is just like a thing. If the Knicks, if he gets 2 fouls in the first quarter, and they sat him for 11 minutes and 55 seconds in the second, just to like preserve, like, hey, we don't want you to be in foul trouble the rest of the game. We're gonna give you this quarter off, and then maybe there's 5 seconds left. Like, we'll put you back in for this one play. He's getting a foul on that in those 5 seconds. He cannot get to the second half without picking up 3 fouls. Having said that, from the offensive side of the ball, like that yesterday was Saturday was Jaylen Brunson's first 40-point game. It's actually been a much more balanced approach across the board. And Mikal Bridges is starting to emerge as that third guy.
Gotta be. Yeah.
Both offensively and defensively. They're starting to feature him more, which is good. So I'm at the point where now you did say something that was interesting about like the big game moments, and again, no disrespect to the Wizards, but it's just that's not the big game that
you don't get up for that. It's
right. This upcoming Friday they play OKC in OKC, and that's really the first test. And they may go into that game. We'll see what happens tonight. We'll see what happens on Wednesday against Utah, but they may go into that game on a 9-game winning streak. And who knows? Like, can you take it to the next level to compete with a team that instead of has 5 wins has 5 losses on the season? And that's what I think is going to be the most intriguing part really over the next month, where they play OKC on Friday, then they play Chicago the next night, and then for the next 25 days and maybe even 30 days, they don't leave I-95. Like they have 2 road games over their next until February 3rd. And the 2 road games are Brooklyn and Philly. Like that stretch is going to feature some good teams. The Nuggets come into town. The Memphis Grizzlies come into town. Minnesota comes into town. All these really good teams. Boston obviously makes a trip to New York. And you're going to get a chance to see how they look, but it's all home games. So, I'm ready to see what this team that is on pace for 56 wins now. How do you look against the top of the heap here in the NBA? And
this is a top 3 team in the East to me. So, I can say this because I don't have to watch the Knicks every night, but the regular season at this point, like I almost don't think it matters a ton. Like you got to take care of business, but for them, I would be thinking like, how do I get past Boston? And if they've got 2 really good, perimeter defenders in the playoffs, things just get a little weird and a little clunky. Like if somebody shuts down Brunson, do you have enough else there? And I think there's certain ways to exploit that team. So do you have the right personnel to be able to get through that matchup? Or Cleveland and anybody else, I just wouldn't be all that. I mean, I don't know. Milwaukee, maybe they get plucky enough that like, that they make that a tough matchup. But that's where I'd be thinking if I were them, is like championship or bust, honestly.
Can I tell you a very irrational first world fear that I have?
Love that. Yeah,
it's what happened with Minnesota last year. Like they built a team that was like, we got to get past Denver. They did. And then they had just didn't have a team that was good enough to beat Dallas, and that series was much closer than people I think give it credit for. Minnesota had a lead in the final minute of game 1 and game 2 and just lost both of those games. Like Luka literally hit a borderline buzzer beater in game 2. But having said that, I worry that if it's just get past Boston is the goal, then you got to build a team that's good enough to win the whole thing, not just that's got the blueprint to beat one team. They would be the team to beat, but the way things are shaking out, I mean, they're going to be the 2 or 3 seed Boston at this year. They may just be bored come playoff time. So we'll see what happens. I don't disagree that the regular season it doesn't necessarily. I don't disagree that it's not the end all be all. Like them winning 56 games probably shouldn't be the goal. This is also just a franchise that hasn't won 56 games in a long time. So it's not at the point where it doesn't matter to the fan base at all. Like we're going to enjoy these 56 wins if it happens,
50 and above seems like pretty doable for me. And that puts you in a place to do what you need to do. So I would just be trying to fill out the rest of my roster to matchup proof myself against those teams. What is the piece that gets me past Cleveland? What is the piece that gets me past, Boston? And I don't know what those things are for them in each of those individual matchups. But if they're all there already, great. You just rock with it and see if you're good enough.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what they do. All right, couple questions from people watching live. More a comment, and I guess you agreed with him. Dirty Dancer, Cooper Flag is not a 1. So who's the 1 in the draft that you're most intrigued by?
Yeah, he's not a 1 right now, right? Like he's got the same like left to right spin or right to left spin, like to try to close every game, and I don't think that that's going to get done for you. But he should also be a high school senior right now. So the fact that he's got plenty of time left to add to his bag and put these other things in. But he's sort of like the do-it-all guy, I think, play defense, pass, create for other people. So you get everything with him. But I think he'd be much better as like another kind of number 2 sort of guy. Dylan Harper looks like the guy that's like, give me this huge offensive load and I'll go out and just sort of carry a team. And you can all orbit around me. Like it sort of reminds me of like big Jaylen Brunson to a certain extent. So I think that would be a guy that would make a lot of sense here in Washington too.
Another one from Dirty Dancer. Is Sarr comfortable being a full-time center after not wanting to be one in the draft? This is Alex Sarr, the Wizards' top 3 draft pick from last year.
Is he comfortable? You'd probably have to ask him. Would I be comfortable with that as a Wizards fan? It reminds me a little of like the Anthony Davis thing where like, maybe you start him next to a traditional big or certain matchups you do that. But I think you want him closing the game as a 5. That's your best, potential like 5 out lineup long term. He's not shooting the 3 particularly well, although he's above 45% over the last 10 games. So like that's the long-term vision is he can kind of close a lot of ground. And that's like, I think how you become like a competitive modern team. Like you can't expect to play him next to Jonas Valanciunas forever. And that's, they've struggled defensively with that combo because they just, now you've got Sarr on wings essentially. And Valanciunas is just sort of not much defensively at this point in his career. So they've looked the best defensively with Sarr at the 5 as this sort of switchable ground coverage team. And I know your boy Sam Vecini was big on the mobility for Sarr and how much court he can cover. And I really do think that's like his greatest value defensively is just like the ability to be all over the place, recover, and things like that.
Next up is from Pliny the Welder. Thank you, Pliny, for a nice logo, Pliny, staring at it right now. Wizards have some nice young pieces. Do they project Sarr projects? Oh, we just kind of answered this as a. Do they think Sarr projects as a true stretch 5, or as a 5 that could shoot a little? Pretty much just answered it. But if you want to expand on it, go ahead.
They're seemingly like creating offense to generate open 3-point looks for him. So I think they're trying to figure out if that can be the case. It seems like they very much want that to be. That's been a point of frustration for me this season is I would like to see them start, creating a few looks for him closer to the basket. But if from day one, you're running everything to get him these 3-point looks, like you probably are expecting him to do that long term.
So I apologize in advance for this next one, but from Busy, do y'all really need to, do you really need to trade anyone to tank? Y'all suck as is. What's the most you think you can get for your most valuable asset? We kind of talked about what they can get for Kuzma.
Yeah, I mean, Busy sucks at listening because we already talked about this, right?
Oh, Busy.
I guess we were listening to the podcast where we said they're like sort of winning proof at this point. Like there's nothing this team is going to do to get above probably 12 wins over the course of the season. So that's not really the issue. It's trading him so that you create the most opportunities for development for the young guys that you actually care about long term. What's the most we think we can get for that most valuable asset? Already talked about that too. If they can get a first round pick, you just do it and pull the trigger and don't think twice about it.
It may not mean much to you, but roasting Busy like that is going to be very funny for me for a long time, especially in the Knicks Film School community. Last one for Joseph Sedano is mostly for me. How will Mitchell Robinson fit when he returns? So this is a cop-out first part of my answer, and it's that I want to actually see him return before I factor in how he'll fit when he returns. I just don't have that hope isn't really the word. I just don't have that guarantee that we're going to see Mitch Robinson on the court this year in a Knicks uniform. If he returns, I think he just takes Precious Achiuwa's spot in the rotation. It's just that simple. I think Precious, I mean, we saw this last year during the playoffs. When Mitch came back, Precious was the third center in the playoffs. And then when Mitch went out, Precious became the backup center. It was really just that simple. I think that's how it works. That's where I think the Mitchell Robinson would fit. From your outsider's perspective, is that what you would probably go to with Mitchell Robinson, Matt?
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. It's just, I'm not as locked into Knicks fandom as you guys are here.
Right. Yeah.
I would just be worried about him staying healthy enough to matter at any point too, and I would want some kind of insurance for that more than anything. Honestly, I think you can make the fit work.
Yeah.
At least for 12 minutes a game or whatever the case may be. You're gonna play Towns a ton of minutes in the playoffs regardless, and you get a little more rest in between games. So I think, having to play them isn't as interesting as how you kind of like work around him if he doesn't do anything for you.
So 2 more questions just came in that I think are interesting. First one is an actual question about the game. What kind of defense, this is from George Alvernia, what kind of defense do you think you're going to throw at just Jaylen Brunson after that double nickel game?
It's the H&P defense. Hope and pray that he is not on a heater at this point in time. I mean, there's not really a lot you can do for Brunson when he's sort of on one the way he seemed to be the other night. And it was funny. Like, they had a game early in the year where they absolutely, like, Koulibaly took the Trae Young assignment, like, didn't switch much and just absolutely shut him down. And they played him 2 nights later, and Trae Young went off, but nobody else on the team did anything. So you just got to really figure it out. Like, are we going to live with Brunson going for 55 and try to stop everybody, or do we sell out totally to stop Brunson? And I think you made a great point. Like, they haven't had to rely on Brunson a lot this year to carry them offensively. It's really more of a dynamic team approach. So I'd almost kind of like put one guy on him and say, hey, Koulibaly, do the best you can, and we'll just sort of live with the results, but we're not going to sell out totally to stop Brunson. That's what I would do, but we'll see how it works out.
Yeah, his ability to break that first level of the defense just seemed to be the secret. Just most of his points came in the restricted area, and that's what that was honestly my takeaway from SAR for most of the night. That once Jaylen Brunson got past that first line, he was getting whatever he wanted at the rim, and then he didn't this wasn't a game of a 55-point game where he was just hot from three. It was 3 of 9 from three, and if he was getting past that first line, it was either a layup or a floater, or he's getting 2 free throws. So I think it was it was an old school version of how you get to 55 points, which was interesting. So
it's fun to watch too. Like, if you're SAR, like, that's probably an issue with him still right now, is there's a lot of like, oh, I can block anything. I can recover from weak side and just I'll get to it. And I think you could do that in the NBL or overtime elite or whatever. But in the NBA, like, it's got to be better team basketball, positioning, rebound, like actual rotation. And they didn't kind of do much of that yet.
Yeah. Last question from Cardiac Knicks. And I wanted to be on the record. I would not offer this, but I wanted to honor his offer, his question, and see what your answer would be. Matt, would you take Precious, Sims, and a second rounder for Jonas Valanciunas?
I really like Sims. I don't know. Every time I watch him, I think he was good. That's maybe also some sort of pre-draft bias that's still lingering there. And I don't know, it depends on where the second round pick is. If it's like a fake 35 or better second round pick, like, that'd be great. I'd be really interested in I don't think the Wizards will be good enough for this to matter, but like, the Wizards owe the Knicks a first round pick that probably will never convey, and it'll default to 2 second rounders. Just getting that back would be more interesting to me. You're not going to do that for Valanciunas, I don't think, but if you're the Knicks, you probably never see that pick anyway. So I don't know, maybe there's something they can figure out there that would be more appealing than like the 53rd pick in the draft or something that doesn't hold a whole lot of value.
Interesting. Again, I want to repeat, I would not offer this. It's no disrespect to Jonas Valanciunas. If I'm trading Precious Achua and Jericho Sims, I mean, I guess that is your whole center depth. So it would be
Yeah.
I guess you're keeping Mitch in this situation. So you're trusting him to be your backup center. It's for a wing, is my point. Like if I'm using those assets, it would be for some kind of wing. Whatever, I don't know what value Precious Achua and Jericho Sims in a second have for any kind of wing, but it'd be for something a little bit better. That's all, or something different, I should say. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think Precious gives you a little versatility. Like he can do enough up and down a lineup that I would rather keep someone like that than Valanciunas that's really locked in as like this plotting, drop coverage 5 at this point. It doesn't really cover anybody. So I don't really think it makes a ton of sense for either team, but maybe there's some kind of framework of a deal there. Like I don't think Valanciunas would hurt to have as some insurance, but you're not probably going to get a whole lot better either unless you put like a real asset in there.
Yeah, and Cardiac Nick's replies, Precious and Sims not getting you a solid wing, Andrew. They're also probably not getting you a solid backup center, which I think they just are that already. So I'm just, if you're going to use those assets, like just keep them. Or if you can get a wing, get a wing. Like I think the Knicks are better if they were to keep Precious. And this is, again, no disrespect to Jonas Valanciunas, but Matt made the point earlier about Boston being the goal. Like, how can you beat Boston the best? Having a switchable 5 like Precious would be how. Like going to those looks where Cat's not on the floor at times and having Precious play the 5, maybe with McBride as your lead guard. Like I understand this is a situation where both Brunson and Towns aren't on the floor, so maybe Brunson has to be on the floor in these stretches, but there will be times when you're going to want a better 5 from the defensive standpoint that can switch, whether beyond the Porzingis onto, I mean, we just saw this, and I know I'm taking all of this out on Cardiac Knicks, which I apologize, but we just saw this on Christmas Day. Like they went down the stretch without Karl Anthony Towns and put OG Anunoby on Victor Wembanyama. So that way, like Precious could be on the floor and switching onto 4s and switching onto 3s at certain times. Like that's just that's the blueprint and that different look you can go to. And look, it's only been 3, but he's made 3 corner threes at this point. Like at this point, they're gravy. So those are just not what you're getting from a Valanciunas or a Mitch Robinson or a Jericho Sims. So I hate to turn this pod into like the Precious Achua defense at the end, but I felt it was necessary to do. From the Bronx and a Mets fan, that's also why I'm protecting Precious Achua at the end of this pod. So
like the archetype or blueprint that Achua fills is kind of the guy you need. I don't know if he's the guy to actually do it, or if he's actually good enough to fill that kind of switchable small ball 5 role, but you need that kind of player. I actually think Brogden makes more sense for the Knicks than Valanciunas does.
Well, if this is what campaign is now, where his minutes just keep going down and down, maybe I don't know if the Knicks have the money for the Brogdon, and maybe look the assets. Who knows what the Wizards want back for Brogdon? It felt like for a while last season they were gonna get Brogdon or something like Malcolm Brogdon, and they went the route of Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks, which was an experience for the majority of last season. Well, if we get a thriller like we did on Saturday night, we'll at least be entertained by Monday night's matchup. But I guess I wish for you, Matt, that you get the entertaining factor and the loss. I think we both kind of want that.
Run it back. Yeah. You guys get the
Knicks.
win. We get a little like something to watch before, wanting to like crush our souls, but it's okay. We'll take it. We'll
got it.
Let's run it back.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, it's always good to see you. And I hope one of these days we're talking about a better version. Again, I believe trending up. We'll see what the Koulibaly, Bub Carrington, Alex Sarr version of the Wizards eventually turns into. One of these days, I'm looking forward to like the Pistons pods that I've been doing this year, the Hornets pods that I've been seeing, where it's like, oh, this I see the vision, I see what's happening.
A little more fun.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, hope you have a happy New Year. Before you get out of here, please let the fine folks at home know where they can find you and all your work.
Yeah. First of all, hey, like it's one of those things where I look at the Knicks and I'm like, this is maybe what we could be. And you guys have been that other like long suffering fan base with us. I feel like, so there's some kindred spirit vibes there. So I think seeing the Knicks actually be this, it gives me some hope that maybe with competent management, the Wizards can get there. So we'll see. So keep doing what you guys are doing. Everything you do at Knicks Film School too is also an inspiration. If anybody cared enough to watch things about the Wizards, I think that's what we'd try to build to over on our end as well. But it's Bleav in Wizards, BLEAV, myself and former Wizard Jahadi White once a week. And then all that funnels up into our Department of Hoops YouTube channel, where we've got a bunch of other local college basketball podcasts and stuff like that too. So if you care about Georgetown or Maryland or GW or American, any of those things, you can find some content for that over there as well.
Department of Hoops, good name. I'm assuming that's a DMV spinoff, like or play on, like.
Yeah, I mean, hey, we're near everybody's department of something here, right? So
yeah,
might as well have a basketball one too.
I'm an idiot. Yeah, it's DC. No, it's just the fact that the Department of Everything is near. Okay, is in the capital, and so
the new basketball cabinet position we're opening up here.
Gotcha. Well, I wish the Department of Hoops and the rest of the DC area the best of luck going forward. We'll see what happens in the future. Matt, it's always good to see you. Thank you for joining me, and thank you everybody for tuning in to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. We try to do this every game or every game day, the day of the game, and I will be back on Wednesday to preview the Knicks matchup on New Year's Day against the Utah Jazz. If you dug the show, please head over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. Until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game tonight, and I will speak with you soon. Peace.